So as you can see, there were multiple attempts required on the lines for the placement of the bridge. Some of the lines are actually really pretty easy. This one running vertically here is a good example, because this is just essentially the scale, marks the scale length of the guitar. So all we needed to do was measure from the nut to the 12th fret and then essentially just double that distance and then mark it here. But what you can see is the multiple lines here, which are my kind of gauge as to where the fitting of the bridge should go. And what I've done is a few of them where you can see it's a selection of lines being drawn from the neck, which was one recommended way, where you're just essentially extrapolating the angle of the neck as it's fitted into the little pocket here down to this point, which worked okay. Not to the way I like though, because what I was noticing was when I would take a square from the nut and run it down the length of the neck and then to this scale length point here, what I kind of worked out, or what I think intuitively, is that the straight line that we're looking at along the center line of the guitar should actually land us pretty much bang on in the middle of the neck here, midway between the third and fourth string on the nut. But that wasn't happening until I got to the final measure, which was essentially done just by working the angle out from the pocket here, running that straight and running it straight along here, which is what we got in the end. So you can see that there's been a few different attempts there, but I think happily now we're in a stage where we can put the bridge into place. You can see here that I've set the bridge up with each of the little saddles roughly midway in their range, a little bit closer to the end. Whilst, as I say, the intonation point is meant to be the scale length is meant to be the length, double the length from the nut to the 12th fret. These will actually have to be adjusted for the differing string widths, but this is a good start for us to be getting on with anyway. So next step will be to put the bridge in place, at least with we'll put all of the screws in. We don't have to worry about getting them too strong. Then we've got to put a couple of the tuners on, put the high and the low E string on to just check that they're running straight up and down the neck, which obviously will mean running from the neck down to the bridge. Check that that's looking okay. Then we've got to put our template together and cut out or at least initially the standard Telecaster headstock shape, and possibly some changes there just to ostensibly for artistic touch, but more just to show that it's not trying to look like a direct knockoff Tele, and is clearly not a Fender. But we'll actually wait till the stage of making the thing look like a Fender first, and then worry about anyone being fooled as to what it actually is. So we will return on that later. Just on unnecessary steps that are taking here, something that I noticed was a little bit tricky to work out was the midpoint of the bridge, which has to be put along this center line. And so what I've decided to do is to resuscitate the calipers so that I can measure from a flat surface here and here. Again, I'm almost positive I'm probably overthinking these things massively, but I'd rather just take the extra steps, particularly on my first go around, and we'll work out where we end up from there. So in order to capture everything so I can pinpoint where it all went wrong later, what I'm just doing here, or what I have just done, is just roll the saddles forward a little bit. I've marked the intonation line already with them back, but it's going to be rather difficult. And actually, now that I look at it again, I think we'll be all right there. But we just want to make sure that I can actually get the screws in without damaging anything. Brass, as these are, is quite soft, so yeah, stainless steel against brass will only lead to one winner, so I want to just make that change there. So I'm just going to move them forward a little bit further again. My figuring is on this particular step, as you can see the sort of circles that I've already just drawn, which will remain. The issue is really from here, from what we've seen, even if these are too far back and I have to roll them forward, this can be patched and will be covered by the bridge anyway, so it's my figuring at this stage, and we can work out where it all went wrong in the autopsy if it does, but my figuring is that it's a fairly easy thing to deal with if it goes wrong from here, so that's what we'll be working on. So in an effort to do things the right way, I took myself off to Bunnings and got some of these brad point drills, which have that neat little fine point on them and the two scoops to essentially stop the drill bit from wandering around when you start drilling. The issue naturally that I had is, and they had one set available, I'm pretty confident that those are going to be, this narrowest one is actually too wide for this screw, so what I'm going to do is just use this normal well, it's kind of a catch-all drill bit. My hoping is I've centre punched these holes, so wandering shouldn't be too much of a problem in this case, but not ideal, but again, we'll live dangerously at this stage of the build. Okay, so what I've got now is just two of these are the cheap machine heads that came with the kit, so these are actually going to be replaced, but for the time being I'm just happier to have this type of stuff screwed on there so that it's less likely to scratch up the final Grover tuners. So I've got the tuner in for the high and the low E now, and you can see the neck is just clamped in place here with, I've just screwed the bridge in with two screws, just not so that it's absolutely rock solid, but enough that I can actually see that it's on straight, and that's enough now. So what we'll do is we'll just loosely attach with some tension the high and the low E and see how we look from there. So I've probably not tightened these up, well, maybe not enough, but I'm satisfied with the tightness we've got. This is the high E is a little bit tighter than the low E, but you can see that they run quite happily into the nut and remain, as you can see, kind of nice and consistent as they run off the bridge. As you can see, that low E is a little bit slack, but you can get the gist that it goes nice and straight and keeps a nice, you can see probably more on this high E, that the line that it keeps there with from the edge of the neck straight into the bridge, into the nut is nice and straight, and roughly that same sort of thing as you can see with the low E there. So that's a good outcome, so we can take all of that off now and we're ready to move to the next step, which will be putting the template onto the headstock to get it ready for cutting. Okay, so from the template we got, we've marked it out, as you can see. Interestingly enough, the holes where they're showing here for the tuners didn't actually line up, but I actually looked up the dimensions of the Telecaster head, and you can it actually is precisely measured from the nut to here, so we've got the rough dimensions right, and also this line comes straight out from the body here, as you can see. So I think we're good to go. Interestingly though, I mean, you kind of think, well, we want it to be a Tele-style, but given that it's not an actual Telecaster, I mean, the actual eventual shape of the head doesn't matter that much, but I think, as you can see from here, we're pretty much in the ballpark anyway. So this is going to, of course, get quite exciting, because the setup that we've got here is such that I'm cutting it with the jigsaw here, which is one of the many power tools of which I have that I am not wildly experienced with, but we're going to give it a bash. The interesting thing here is, also cutting it freehand. So the idea is to cut away from the lines reasonably well, and we'll then actually just fix that up with the sander to bring it into the final dimensions that we're looking for here. So we're looking for a close cut, but certainly with plenty of room to manoeuvre, and we'll get the remainder out with a rasp and sandpaper, and possibly even actually just run over it with a router to get the lines nice and smooth. But we'll see how we go when we get to that stage. So next section will either be great celebration or extreme concern once we see what the headstock actually looks like. Okay, so that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it, and the reason is, and you can kind of see it here, and this is probably a combination of limited experience with jigsaws, which should be obvious, but where I was really delicate with it was there was often quite a lot of tear out happening with the jigsaw blade, and my main concern was actually, and you can see why there's a lot of these sort of rough edges, because I've just sort of gone up to a point and just sort of then run the jigsaw on it, but is basically with the tear out and some of the bits I get, and you can sort of see the amount here, any closer I think to that edge, and even though I'm going to round the edge over, my fear was that there was going to be a big fracture in the wood, and it was going to actually sort of get well inside the bounds, and then we're going to have to use some filler or something else less than ideal. So I'm going to leave it there and basically just get some fairly coarse grit paper and just see if I can rub it back that way, at least for the most part. I'd rather not use a rasp at this stage. I'd rather just sort of take it fairly delicately on it and see how we go from there. So I will update at the next stage. So we've been moving a little bit further along now, and you can see, particularly around here, which is where I've been focusing much of my energy, you can see that the starting to come in towards the line, and I'm just working more on the places where it's a little further away from the line, and we'll bring that in. I'm testing as I go, not on these places I haven't really touched yet, but I've just got the square here that I am using periodically just to check that we're remaining in the ballpark. Now, as I say, that's going to get rounded over, but I don't want it to I want to round it over once we've got it right, not actually trying to chase a square edge as we're going through it. So essentially just keeping everything nice and tidy as we go through. I'm using 80 grit paper actually, and I think on my next trip to Bunnings, actually, the lesson I think I learned here is we can probably get something a little bit even angrier still, and when we're just trying to sort of abrade large amounts of material. So we'll carry on from there. So this is where I'll leave it for the time being. You can see it's gradually starting to take the shape of a Telecaster headstock, which incidentally is probably my least favourite of all headstocks, but it is a bit of a classic, so we'll let it off on this occasion. But yeah, you can see the curve is starting to come into it quite nicely here, and just a little bit more to shave off, but quite happy to work on this entirely by hand. It's kind of just keeps things moving more at a more leisurely pace, which means my chance of mistakes is a bit less, and yeah, hopefully it'll come out looking good. So we'll pick it up again.